First, let me say thanks to Adam, who's been a good friend and an advisor throughout the entire primary and general election process, and whose organization is doing a lot to bring basic conservative values back to our culture, back to our young people, and back to the institutions of education where they've been banished for far too long. So Adam, thanks for all that you've done for me personally and for the movement. I want to thank all of you for being here, and I want to thank especially Kevin Roberts and all of the Heritage Foundation for 50 years of incredible work on conservative policy. The old famous story, of course, is that when Ronald Reagan took over, he went to the Heritage Foundation to identify all the things, how could he translate his campaign promises into reality. And I really believe that we are on the forefront of a new conservative majority in this country, and we are going to, hopefully, in 2024, take back the White House, and this organization is going to play a major role in helping us figure out how to govern at the White House, at the Senate, at the House, and all across our great country. So, Kevin, thank you for your leadership, and thanks for being at the forefront of the things that matter. I have 17 minutes here, which for a U.S. Senator is actually not that much time. When you put a microphone in front of a U.S. Senator and you don't have security about to escort them off stage, they can get a little long tooth or a little long-winded here. But let me talk about something that is maybe not as inspiring as some of the remarks you're going to hear today, but I think is so important, because we are in 2023 faced with an incredible fork in the road in this country, and this organization and every single one of you in this room will play a big role in which pathway we choose. And that fork is about the foreign policy that we will choose as a country, and whether we will have a foreign policy that ruthlessly and rationally pursues our own interests, or whether we have a foreign policy that sends American troops, American blood, and treasure to where it simply doesn't belong and will do no good in the process. Now, I'm 38 years old. I graduated from high school in June of 2003. Before I graduated from high school in April of 2003, just a few weeks after we invaded Iraq, I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. My entire life has been influenced and affected by the decisions that we made a month before I enlisted in the Marine Corps and just a few months before I graduated from high school. And let me tell you, I changed my mind on this. When I was a young high school student, I read books, I consumed information, I watched Sean Hannity debate Alan Colmes back in the day, if any of you remember that. And I remember thinking to myself that what we would do in Iraq was transform it from a horrible dictatorship into a flowering democracy. And I hate to say that didn't happen. And I also hate to say, not just that it didn't happen, not just that some of us were wrong, myself very much at the top of the list, even though I was only a high school student, but the people who were most wrong suffered no consequences, and the American foreign policy establishment has learned zero lessons from what is perhaps the most unforced and catastrophic error in the history of this country. Trillions. We spent trillions of dollars. We killed thousands of Americans and more Iraqis. We eradicated the oldest Christian population in the world, all in the service of increasing the power of Iran and putting our ally Israel under greater threat. And yet the people who pursued that policy, the people who pushed it, still have cushy think tank jobs, thankfully not here. They still have great media consultantships. They make a lot of money and they have a lot of prestige. I think it's time to throw those ideas on the ash heap of history and tell the people who made the mistakes of 20 years ago, we're not going to let you make them again in 2023. I mean, just think about this. People that, I know a lot of you in this room, and I'm sure a lot of you have different views on foreign policy, but think about all the people that 20 years ago, 10 years ago, we thought of as friends and allies in the conservative movement. People like Bill Kristol, people like David Frum, right? Now, maybe all of you knew more than I did at the time, but these guys were people who I thought knew everything. They knew exactly what we needed to do in American foreign policy. It doesn't bother me that they were wrong. What bothers me is that they've suffered no consequences. Think about this. If you had been put in a position of power where you had advocated for a catastrophic decision in your company, in your personal life, in your business, certainly at the height of American foreign policy, don't you think you should suffer some consequences when you screw it up? Is that common sense? This is maybe the most important lesson of Iraq, is that the people who drive our foreign policy very often don't know what they're doing, but they suffer no consequences when they're wrong. We in this room need to change that. We need to make sure that the people who have made catastrophic mistakes at the very least have to apologize for it before they advocate the next catastrophic mistake for the next generation. How about that? But if lesson one from Iraq is that we should stop rewarding people who get us into the wrong situations again and again, lesson two is that there is something, I think, in the heart of every American, an admirable thing in the heart of every American, this love of freedom, this love of democracy, this love of liberty. And ladies and gentlemen, we have to recognize that while I believe that that fire is alive in the heart of every American, that doesn't mean it's alive in the heart of every other person all across the world. We cannot take American values and force them on people who don't want them. And we have to stop running our foreign policy based on moral slogans instead of on cold, hard reality. Remember, Iraq was all about freedom, liberty, and democracy. It was all about bringing the American way of life to Iraq, and yet what we actually got out of it was Iran. Iran becoming even more powerful than they were 20 years ago. That is what happened because we weren't thinking. We were too busy talking about moral slogans. It was a disaster. Now let's go back, let's move forward a little bit, because I think we need to apply these lessons, importantly, to a new conflict in a new war that a lot of people in this town think America should get more involved in. And frankly, we're learning, apparently, that America already maybe has troops on the ground in Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, get America out of Ukraine. Get American troops out of Ukraine. It is a disaster for this country. Now, why is it a disaster for this country? Because I want to be clear and I want to be specific. Look, I admire the brave Ukrainians as much as any person in this room or any person in this town. They have, against incredible odds, fought a very terrible enemy, and they have fought bravely. But let's not mistake the courage of the Ukrainian troops on the ground with the fact that they have the most corrupt leadership and corrupt government in Europe, and maybe the most corrupt leadership anywhere in the world. Can any person here, I'm a U.S. Senator, and I don't know the answer to this question, where have the $130 billion that we spend in Ukraine, where have they gone? We don't know. It hasn't been properly tracked, and when U.S. senators and congressmen try to find out the answer, the Biden administration shuts us down. But here's where, set aside the fact that we don't have enough money in this country. Why are we spending $130 billion on Ukraine when we can't even pay our own bills at home? Set that to the side, and let's talk about the most important part of this war. Now, I've been an advocate for a very long time that America, we need to make more of our own stuff. We need to manufacture our own weapons, our own technologies right here in the good old US of A. We made a mistake, ladies and gentlemen, to offshore all of our important manufacturing technology to China, to Mexico, to other countries. But now what that means is that we don't have the manufacturing capacity here to support America's military goals of the future. Let me highlight this with one very extraordinary statistic. Right now, as we speak, the Russians are firing 20,000 artillery shells a day in Ukraine. Russia has 1/10 the size of the economy of the United States. Do you know how many artillery shells we're sending to Ukraine? How many we're able to manufacture in our country? About 1,000 a day. So an economy that is 10 times smaller than our own is able to manufacture weapons 20 times more than we can. How did we let this happen? But since we let it happen, let's deal with the reality. There are missile systems, there are artillery systems, there are bullets, basic weapons of war that we are sending to Ukraine right now that the real enemy is watching. Because the thing that we need to prevent more than anything is a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. It would be catastrophic for this country. It would decimate our entire economy where the computer chips, so much of those are made in Taiwan. It would throw this country into a Great Depression. And right now, do you know that Joe Biden is not sending weapons to Taiwan? weapons that we promised the Taiwanese because we're sending those weapons to Ukraine or elsewhere. How does that make any sense? Now, here's the thing that I'm often confronted with. When people tell me that we can focus on Ukraine and Taiwan at the same time, they say that we have to show Putin that we mean business so that Xi in China will know that we mean business too. But the unfortunate fact is that Putin and Xi, they don't care about our chest thumping. They don't care about what we say. They care about whether we can make enough bullets to fight the war that we may have to fight. That is all that matters. It's time to bring our manufacturing home. It's time to manufacture our weapons in the United States. And it's time to send a message to the world that America is the arsenal of democracy, but we cannot do that unless we get out and stop the focus on Ukraine. We got to focus on China because that's where the real enemy is. This is hard for a lot of us to accept. It's hard for a lot of us to accept that the arsenal of democracy in World War II is making 1/20th the artillery shells that Russia's making. But that is the reality. And let me close this question of foreign policy, this argument on foreign policy, with what we need to do to rebuild our own country. Yesterday, I stood on the Senate floor, my first speech on the Senate floor, actually, and I objected to a Biden administration. I sometimes say the Obama administration, and I confuse myself, and then I say, well, it's actually the same thing, so who cares? But a Biden administration ambassador who went to the very conservative country of Ghana, where she was the ambassador, and decided that it would be in America's best interest to hang up the trans pride flag in the American embassy in Ghana. Okay? We are led by unserious people, ladies and gentlemen. We're led by a bunch of fools, if we're being honest. Let's be more direct. Now, here's the thing. The Chinese, Larry Summers, the Obama administration economist, once said, when the Chinese come to Africa, they want to build you an airport. When the Americans come to Africa, they want to lecture you. They want to lecture you about progressive politics. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get progressive politics out of our foreign policy. If a majority of Americans don't believe something, we shouldn't be forcing it down the throat of somebody else. But this is what American foreign policy has become. We ignore the fact that we don't manufacture enough of our own weapons, and we send woke gender studies professors to Africa when the Chinese are building roads and bridges and hospitals. And you know why this matters? It matters because Africa has an incredible future in the economy of the 21st century. And if all the minerals and all the resources and all the possibilities of Africa in the 21st century are controlled by China, we are going to suffer. You can't manufacture computer chips without some of those minerals. You can't manufacture weapons without some of those minerals. So let's get the woke stuff out of our diplomacy, and let's get back to an American foreign policy based on our national interest. It's really that simple. Now thank you. Now, let me just finish with this one final thought here. You heard this from Tim Scott, great colleague. You'll hear this from a lot of other people in the future. We live in an incredibly dangerous world and a very new world. I talked earlier about how it's hard for a lot of us, especially kid 38 years old. I grew up in the era where America was the sole foreign policy power in the world. What will determine whether we win the battle against China? I really don't believe it's not a question of whether we have the best people. Of course we have the best people. It's not a question of whether we have the best economy. Of course, right now we have the best economy. It's not a question of anything other than of leadership and of whether we are willing to trust and believe in the American people, to support their values instead of trying to destroy them. In other words, if you have an American leadership that is trying to destroy the American family, if you have an American leadership that is convincing 12-year-old kids that they were born in the wrong body and we're going to impose crazy surgeries on them to fix this, if you have an American leadership that teaches Americans not that we have a common history and a common future together, but that they should hate one another based on the color of their skin, that is what the modern left is doing to this country, and that's what we have to fight against. If we are strong here at home, if we build things here at home, if we have the self-confidence and the will to say we are all Americans, we believe in an American past, and importantly, in an American future, we will win the battle battle of the future, but that's what this is all about. Don't give up the culture. Don't give up our economy. Don't give up the very things that make us who we are, because whether we beat back the Chinese, it has nothing to do with China, and it has very little to do with the rest of the world. It has to do with whether we allow American leadership to disgrace us and destroy what makes this country special, or whether to build on what comes from the past. I believe we ought to build on what comes from the past, and I believe we will. And let me leave you with one final thought. You know, I'm a new senator. I'm a new politician. I ran for office. Actually, I hate calling myself a politician. It's sort of, I feel like I need to go take a bath or something. But I guess I am. When you run around asking the people of Ohio to vote for you, you become a politician. I've been doing this for all of 2 years. But let me say something. Adam talked about, I think, you don't hear people in America talk about their faith anymore. You don't hear people in America talk about the fact that we were, as John Adams said, a foundational republic created for moral and religious people. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about God. When I was actually talking to a good friend about 2 years ago, actually, when I was thinking about running for Senate. And there was a lot going on in the country at the time. There were a lot of bad things that Joe Biden was doing. This was when, remember, Delta and some of the big corporations in Atlanta were going after Georgia for passing common sense voter ID. You remember that? That was about 2 years ago. And I remember thinking to myself, well, if the corporations are teaming up with the left, what can we really do here? And I was doing something, there's a technical term for what I was doing when you sometimes talk to a friend and you're not feeling great about things. I was whining. I was whining to a buddy about how things were going, and he kind of stopped me dead in my tracks. He's a person who's very influential to me returning to my own Christian faith, and he said, JD, despair is a sin. I thought a lot about this because I talked to a lot of people from all walks of life in the conservative movement. I see a lot of despairing right now in our movement. And I'd encourage you to think despair is not just bad because it allows the other side to take advantage of us. It's not just counterproductive. Despair really is a sin. Our hope in this country is not that everything has been going perfectly in the last 10 years, because it hasn't. Our hope in this country is that we have the best people in the world, we have the best republic in the world, we have the best constitution in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, despair is a sin. Let's fight for this country and take it back. God bless you, and thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Heritage Foundation Research Fellow in the DeVos Center for Life, Religion and Family, Delano Squires.
Well, good morning. And what a great speech by Senator J.D. Vance. I have the honor right now of introducing someone that I consider a friend for the next discussion. Allie Beth Stuckey is the host of the podcast Relatable, where she breaks down the latest in culture, news, and politics from a Christian conservative perspective. She's a frequent guest on Fox News and other media, and the writer and author of the best-selling book, You're Not Enough, and That's Okay. Today, in addition to podcasting, writing, and making the occasional satirical video, Allie Beth speaks to a broad array of gatherings and organizations, including colleges, about the importance of constructing a biblical worldview. Allie is a wife and a mother, vocations that make her one of the most courageous and effective voices in the culture wars. She epitomizes the biblical instruction to speak the truth in love. She is also my wife's favorite Blaze personality, which is noteworthy because I've been a Blaze contributor since 2021. So I know you all are in for a real treat, and I welcome to the stage now Allie Beth Stuckey.